She pushed the plate away without touching a single bite. And that was the moment everything changed, because this wasn't about food anymore. Now the dining room was silent in that expensive, uncomfortable way, where even the sound of silverware feels too loud. And everyone knew her father was the kind of man people didn't question. Then he was powerful, respected, the type of man who owned companies instead of working for them. And tonight he had invited guests who smiled a little too hard around him. But his daughter sat across the table, small hands folded, eyes fixed on something no one else seemed to notice. And it wasn't the food now. The waiter approached carefully, almost rehearsed, and before he could even speak, her father waved his hand without looking up. Like dismissing furniture, then the waiter froze, apologized, and stepped back, and some guests chuckled softly. The kind of laugh that tries to stay polite, but that was when the girl's fork stopped moving, and she stared at the plate like it suddenly meant something else. Now, her father continued talking, boasting quietly, describing deals, numbers, influence, while the waiter stood there waiting for permission to exist. And she looked up at her father, opened her mouth, then closed it again, choosing silence. But the second waiter arrived with the wine, hands slightly shaking, and this time her father sighed loudly, corrected him in front of everyone, and spoke slowly, like explaining something obvious to a child. Now a few people laughed again, louder this time, because laughing felt safer than speaking. Then that was when the girl gently pushed her chair back, just a few inches, enough for the sound to scrape the floor. And every voice stopped, and her father glanced at her, annoyed, asking if something was wrong, smiling the kind of smile that expects obedience. Now she didn't answer right away. She looked at the waiters, then at the guests, and finally back at her plate, untouched. Then she asked one quiet question, barely above a whisper, but it cut through the room, and she said, "Is this how you talk to people when you're full?" And the smile on her father's face paused, just for a second, like his brain needed time to catch up. Now he laughed it off, told her not to be dramatic, told her she was tired, but his voice sounded different this time, thinner. Then she shook her head slowly, pushed the plate further away, and said she wasn't hungry anymore. And one of the guests shifted in their seat. Another looked down at their glass, because suddenly the room felt smaller. Now her father tried to regain control, joking, changing the subject. But the waiters were still standing there, still watching, and the girl stood up, chair scraping loudly again, and everyone watched her. Not because she demanded attention, but because she didn't. Then she said she would eat later, when people weren't treated like they didn't matter, and turned toward the door. Now that was the moment the laughter stopped completely, because no one knew whether to follow her or stay loyal to the man at the head of the table. And her father's face tightened, not in anger, but in something worse, realization, because power doesn't like being reflected back at itself. Then he looked around the table, expecting support, but saw only lowered eyes and 4 sips of wine. Now the waiters were still there, waiting, and for the first time, he noticed them watching him, not the other way around. And if this moment made you uncomfortable, hit the like button, because stories like this are meant to make you feel something. Now the girl didn't slam the door or raise her voice. She simply left. And that quiet exit did more damage than shouting ever could. Then her father sat back down slowly, picked up his fork, and realized the food tasted different when everyone knew what kind of man he was. Now some guests made excuses to leave early, others stayed but spoke less. And the dinner that was meant to celebrate power turned into a reminder of it. And that night, nothing on the menu changed, but something else did. Because respect isn't served, it's noticed. Then if you think the girl did the right thing, leave a comment and say why, because silence speaks louder than insults. Now, and if you want more stories where quiet moments expose loud truths, subscribe to Lonja, because not all power collapses with noise.